You know, everyone needs a little me time. That feeling of peaceful solitude, it can be one of the best ways to recharge and de-stress. But what happens when being alone is no longer a choice? What happens to our brains when we're forced into isolation for days, weeks, or even years? To really get what's going on, we first need to be crystal clear about what kind of alone time we're actually talking about. Right off the bat, we need to draw a really sharp line between two totally different experiences. On one hand, you've got the solitude you choose for yourself. It feels good, it's restorative, it's calming. But on the other hand, you have forced isolation, and that is a whole different beast. It's involuntary, it's incredibly stress-inducing, and as we're about to see, it can be seriously damaging. So let's really dig into that critical difference. Because when isolation is not your choice and it goes on and on, all those positive effects of being alone, they completely evaporate. And the consequences, they become severe. To be perfectly clear about what we're discussing, this is the definition we're going to be working with. We're not talking about a quiet weekend at home. We're talking about being confined, completely alone with nothing meaningful to do for a period of time that feels like it could be forever. This is the exact condition that triggers a massive cascade of changes in the body and brain. So, what is actually happening inside our heads during all of this? Let's take a little journey into the neuroscience of what forced isolation physically does to the very structure of the brain. Okay, this brings us to a super important concept: social reality testing. Think of it like this: it's our constant built-in sanity check. We're always bouncing our thoughts and perceptions off of other people, just to make sure we're seeing things clearly. It's a fundamental part of how we all stay grounded in reality. But what happens when you take that sounding board away? Well, that's when things really start to unravel. A person's very sense of who they are and what is real, it starts to fracture. With no one to check in with, their own thoughts can just spin out of control, turning into obsessions and paranoia. The rational part of the mind loses its grip, and all these raw, unchecked impulses start to take over. And here's the crucial point: the brain's entire operating system literally shifts. It moves away from reason, from logic, from judgment, and it defaults to this state of raw, heightened emotionality. And this isn't just a feeling. There are physical changes behind that shift. Two critical things happen in the brain. First, the limbic system, which is basically your alarm center for fear and stress, it goes into total overdrive. And at the exact same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and self-control, it actually begins to shrink. But the damage doesn't stop in the brain. Oh, no. This chronic stress just ripples through the entire body. We're talking heart palpitations, chronic headaches, completely messed up sleep, even your sense of time starts to warp. And look, this isn't just some theoretical problem. It's a daily reality for hundreds of thousands of people. This whole experience has a name, and it's used systematically in prisons all over the world: solitary confinement. So let's take a look at how this idea went from a concept of quiet reflection to a tool of severe punishment. The scale of this is it's staggering. In 2019, in the United States alone, you're looking at over 120,000 people living in these conditions, spending nearly every single hour of every single day in a tiny cell, experiencing that exact neurological and physical breakdown we just walked through. You know, the history of this whole practice is pretty surprising. Believe it or not, it actually started with good intentions. Back in the late 1700s, Quakers saw it as a humane alternative to, physical punishment. The idea was to give people a space to reflect and find penitence. But by the 1800s, people were already pointing out the severe psychological harm. The practice kind of faded away, only to come roaring back in the 1980s as a way to manage overcrowded prisons. And those early critics, man, they were incredibly powerful. Charles Dickens, he actually visited an American prison way back in the 19th century and wrote this, calling this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain, immeasurably worse than any physical torture. He saw it, he got it, way back then. But here's the thing: the damage doesn't just magically stop when the cell door finally opens. This experience creates these deep, lasting scars that make returning to society incredibly difficult. The trauma from this is so real, and it's so severe, you can actually measure it. Just look at this data. People who have been through solitary confinement are 3 times more likely to show signs of PTSD.
The experience literally rewires their response to stress and fear long after they've gotten out. And that PTSD, it shows up in some really specific ways. People report permanent shifts in their personality, constant anxiety, and inability to concentrate or even form connections with other people. And if they already had a mental health condition, it's almost always made so much worse.
So this leads us to a pretty massive contradiction, right? We have a practice that is scientifically shown to cause immense, lasting harm that works directly against the goal of rehabilitation. And to top it all off, it doesn't even succeed in its other stated goal of reducing violence inside prisons. It's a failure on all fronts. All of this just begs the question, has to be a better way, right? Well, let's take a look at a country that has taken a radically different approach with its prison system. And wow, the difference in philosophy here is it's night and day. The US system, for the most part, is focused on control and punishment. But Norway, they center their entire system around one word: rehabilitation. Yeah, they spend 5 times more per prisoner, but that money goes towards things like classes, job training, and humane living conditions. And the results? Well, they're pretty undeniable. By focusing on treating prisoners with dignity and actually preparing them for life after release, Norway has achieved one of the lowest rates of recidivism, that's people reoffending, in the entire world. It turns out that a more humane approach is also a more effective one. Which leaves us with this final, really fundamental question. I mean, everything we've looked at today, from the neuroscience of loneliness to the hard data from different prison systems, it all seems to point to this one idea. When it comes to healing, rehabilitation, and just growth, do we really get better alone, or is that something we can only ever do together?